Echoes of the past. The clang of the stove, a jarring metallic note, banished the last vestiges of slumber. Arthur Penhaligon lingered, the coarse blanket a comforting rasp against his skin. The morning ritual was etched into his bones, kindling the fire, the dark brew of coffee, breakfast consumed in contemplative silence before the awakening world. Each act, a bulwark against the specters that haunted his waking hours. He swung his legs off the bed, the floorboards issuing their familiar creak. A chill, unwelcome and sharp, permeated his threadbare socks, a herald of winter's imminent arrival. He moved to the stove, his motion spare and efficient, shaped by years of harsh necessity. A seasoned log, a handful of tinder, the rasp of a match under his calloused thumb. Flames danced, eager and bright, painting the log walls with flickering light. Soon, the rich, acrid aroma of brewing coffee filled the small space. Arthur poured a mug, black as night, and carried it to the window. The valley slumbered beneath a veil of mist, the distant peaks mere suggestions. He sipped, the warmth a meager defense against the encroaching cold. Only the twittering of unseen birds and the distant growl of a logging truck disturbed the stillness. Normally a welcome sound, today it only amplified the profound quiet of the cabin, a silence that felt like a weight pressing down on him. Standing at the counter, he ate a Spartan breakfast, stale bread and a hard-boiled egg. Ceremony was absent, conversation non-existent. Only the insistent tick of the ancient wall clock marked time, each beat a percussive reminder of the fragile walls he'd erected around himself. He washed his mug and plate, placing them meticulously in the rack. Control. He craved control, the one thing he could still grasp. Turning from the sink, a ghost in his mind's eye caught him off guard. Not a phantom vision, but an internal echo, a memory erupting unbidden. The sweltering, fetid heat of the jungle. The bitter reek of gunpowder. The maddening drone of insects. He was there again. In the heart of it. The ambush. It had detonated without warning, a furious hail of bullets tearing through the dense undergrowth. He could hear Sergeant Major Davis, a man-mountain of a leader, bellowing commands, his voice a steadfast beacon amidst the madness. Davis, who had always watched his back, a paternal figure in that brutal theater. Penhaligon. On that berm. Provide cover, soldier. He scrambled up the incline, his M16 spitting lead. He saw a Viet Cong soldier, barely a man, his face slicked with terror. Arthur hesitated, a fraction of a heartbeat lost. That sliver of time sealed Davis's fate. A mortar shell detonated nearby, the blast hurling him to the earth. When coherence returned, smoke choked the air, laced with the cries of the wounded. Davis lay mere feet away, his body a ruin of shrapnel. His eyes stared, vacant, at the indifferent sky. I tried, Sergeant Major, Arthur croaked, crawling towards him. But Davis was already beyond reach. The weight of guilt had never lifted. Arthur clamped his eyes shut, desperate to banish the image. He gripped the counter's edge, his knuckles bone white. The phantom scent of cordite lingered, an unwelcome wraith. He fought for breath, his heart a frantic drum against his ribs. Splashing icy water on his face, he tried to anchor himself in the present. The shock helped, somewhat, but a tremor persisted in his hands. He met his own gaze in the cracked mirror. A stranger looked back. A weathered face, scored with the map of war and haunted by regret. He needed to escape the confines of the cabin. Action, any action, was required. Seizing his worn leather gloves, he stepped out the back door. The garden. He'd find solace there, burying himself in the earth, in the repetitive dance of planting and tending. A small oasis of order in a world consumed by chaos. A kaleidoscope of autumnal hues greeted him. Tomatoes, peppers, squash, testament to dogged perseverance. Kneeling between the rows, the cool soil grounded him. He sifted the earth through his fingers, feeling the pulse of life within. He began weeding, wresting the tenacious invaders from the rich soil. Each weed plucked, a small victory, a tangible achievement in a life where triumphs were scarce. His attention was drawn to a row of sickly tomato plants, their leaves tinged yellow and drooping. He frowned. He had been meticulous, attentive. What had he overlooked? He meticulously examined each plant, probing for signs of infestation or disease. He found nothing concrete. Just a general listlessness, a draining of vitality. He recalled his grandmother, a woman intimately connected to the land's secrets. She always said that plants needed more than sustenance. They needed affection. He chuckled softly at the idea. Love. An emotion he'd buried so deeply, he questioned its very existence. Yet, he couldn't ignore their suffering. And he couldn't ignore the faint stirring of sympathy he felt for them. Rising, he retrieved a watering can and a bottle of fertilizer from the shed. He carefully mixed the solution, adhering to the instructions. Then, he began watering the failing plants, murmuring in a soft, reassuring tone. "There you go," he whispered. "Drink deeply. Grow strong." He knew it was likely absurd, that plants were deaf to human words. Nevertheless, as he nourished them, a strange tranquility descended. A sense of interconnectedness. Hours dissolved as he labored in the garden, utterly absorbed. The sun arced across the sky, warming his back. The birds serenaded him with their cheerful melodies. The specter of Davis receded, displaced by the simple gratification of the moment. As twilight approached, he gathered the last of the harvest, filling a basket with ripe tomatoes, vibrant peppers, and plump squash. He carried the weight back to the cabin, his muscles weary, his mind at peace. He paused on the porch, watching the sun bleed below the horizon. The valley was awash in golden light, the mist swirling like ethereal rivers. He inhaled deeply, the cool evening air a balm to his lungs. For the first time in what felt like an eternity, a fragile seed of hope sprouted within him. A conviction that perhaps, just perhaps, he could coexist with the echoes of the past. He stepped inside, the laden basket heavy in his arms. The path ahead remained long and arduous. But he was no longer entirely alone. He had the garden. He had the routine. And perhaps, just maybe, that would be enough to start. A whimper in the woods. The morning air, thick with the scent of honeysuckle and damp earth, clung to Arthur like a second skin. He'd finished his weeding, the rhythmic pull of stubborn roots usually a balm to his frayed nerves. But today, the memory of Sergeant Miller's vacant stare kept resurfacing, a phantom limb aching in his soul. He needed to clear his head. A walk to the mailbox, a mile down the lane, seemed like the only viable escape from the suffocating silence of his own thoughts. Lucky, sensing Arthur's unease, whined softly at his feet, his tail giving a tentative thump against the porch boards. "All right, boy," Arthur sighed, scratching behind Lucky's ears. "Come on. Let's get this over with." The sun was a hazy disk behind the trees, casting long, distorted shadows that danced with every rustle of leaves. Arthur walked slowly, the gravel crunching under his boots, each step a deliberate act of will. Lucky, usually bounding ahead, stayed close, his nose twitching, alert to something unseen. As they neared the mailbox, a high-pitched whimper cut through the morning stillness. Arthur stopped, his hand instinctively reaching for the small, worn knife he carried in his pocket. Old habits, forged in the jungles of Vietnam, died hard. "What is it, boy?" Lucky strained at his leash, pulling towards the thicket of trees that bordered the road. The whimper came again, weaker this time, laced with pain. Arthur hesitated. He'd seen enough suffering in his life to last several lifetimes. He preferred the quiet order of his garden, the predictable rhythm of the seasons. Getting involved, it was a slippery slope. He remembered a mangled bird he'd found as a boy, its wing twisted at an unnatural angle. He'd tried to nurse it back to health, but it had died in his hands, a tiny, broken thing. The helplessness he'd felt then still lingered, a dull ache in his chest. But the whimper persisted, a desperate plea that chipped away at his resolve. "Damn it," he muttered, unclipping Lucky's leash. "Stay close." Lucky, understanding the urgency in Arthur's voice, darted into the undergrowth, his nose to the ground. Arthur followed, pushing aside branches and stepping over fallen logs, the air thick with the smell of pine and decaying leaves. Then he saw it. A small dog, huddled beneath a thorny bush, its fur matted and dirty. It was a scruffy mutt, a mix of breeds Arthur couldn't quite identify, but its eyes, wide and filled with fear, were undeniably intelligent. Its left hind leg was twisted at an unnatural angle, the fur around it stained with blood. The dog whimpered again, a pathetic sound that tugged at something deep inside Arthur. He froze, caught between his desire to retreat and the undeniable pull of compassion. "Easy, boy," he said softly, his voice rough from disuse. "I'm not going to hurt you." The dog flinched, its body trembling. Lucky, sensing the dog's fear, approached cautiously, sniffing the air before settling down a few feet away, a silent gesture of reassurance. Arthur took a step closer, his senses on high alert. He noticed the dog was thin, its ribs clearly visible beneath its matted fur. It hadn't eaten in days. He remembered the leftover chicken he'd planned to have for lunch. He debated the risks. Wild animals carried diseases. He was too old to be dealing with this. He had his own problems, his own demons to fight. But those eyes, they reminded him of the wounded gazelle he'd seen in Vietnam, caught in a snare, its leg broken, its spirit crushed. He hadn't been able to help it then. The memory still haunted him. He couldn't turn away this time. Carefully, he backed out of the thicket, his eyes never leaving the dog. "Stay here," he said to Lucky, who watched him intently. He walked back to the road, retrieved his water bottle from his backpack, and rummaged in his pockets for the small bag of dog treats he always carried for Lucky. He returned to the thicket, moving slowly, deliberately, his hands held out in a gesture of peace. He poured some water into his cupped hand and offered it to the dog. The dog watched him warily, its eyes narrowed. It didn't move. Arthur lowered his hand, placing it gently on the ground a few feet away. He tossed a treat towards the dog. It landed just within reach. The dog hesitated, its nose twitching. Hunger finally overcame its fear. It edged forward cautiously, snatched the treat, and retreated back under the bush, chewing it slowly, its eyes still fixed on Arthur. He repeated the process, offering water and treats, each time moving a little closer. Slowly, painstakingly, he began to gain the dog's trust. After what seemed like an eternity, the dog allowed him to approach close enough to examine its leg. The bone was clearly broken, the injury looked a few days old. It needed a vet. He knew what he had to do. He gently stroked the dog's head, feeling the matted fur beneath his fingers. "It's going to be all right," he murmured, his voice thick with emotion. "I'm going to help you." He carefully scooped the dog into his arms, wincing at the sharp intake of breath as he jostled its injured leg. The dog was surprisingly light, its body frail and weak. He held it close, feeling its trembling body against his chest. Lucky, sensing the dog's distress, whined softly and nudged Arthur's leg with his nose. "Easy, boy," Arthur said, his voice strained. "We're going home." He turned and began the long walk back to the house, the injured dog cradled in his arms, Lucky trotting faithfully by his side. The morning sun, finally breaking through the trees, cast a warm glow on his face, but Arthur didn't notice. He was too focused on the small, broken creature in his arms, and the unexpected surge of hope that flickered within him. Perhaps, just perhaps, he could save this one. And maybe, in saving it, he could save himself as well. Lucky's plea. The kitchen, normally a haven of swift meals and solitary brews, became an impromptu treatment room. Arthur, with surprisingly deft fingers, examined the laceration on Lucky's flank. A low, mournful sound escaped the dog, a guttural lament that resonated deep within Arthur. Though lacking the ear-splitting shriek of battlefield agony, it held a similar echo of exposed vulnerability. He swabbed the wound with antiseptic, its sharp, medicinal tang dominating the air. Lucky recoiled, yet remained steady, his amber eyes locked on Arthur's face, a silent, hopeful entreaty. Finding himself murmuring to the dog, a soothing cadence, Arthur spoke, "Easy, fella. Just a nip. You'll be shipshape soon." The words felt foreign, awkward on his tongue, save for Lucky, he hadn't voiced them to anyone in a seeming age. Affixing the bandage proved tricky. Though remarkably still, the angle presented a challenge. Arthur, his knees throbbing a dull complaint, finally secured the gauze. He stroked the dog's head. "There you have it. All fixed." In response, Lucky's warm, wet tongue swiped across Arthur's hand, igniting a subtle tremor. It was a humble gesture, yet felt, weighty with significance. A bond reforged after what felt like an age of solitude. He fashioned a bed for Lucky in the kitchen corner, using an old blanket and some frayed towels. The dog looked appeased, settling with a sigh, his gaze never leaving Arthur. The day unfolded in a quiet cadence of tending and observation. Arthur checked on Lucky periodically, offering fresh water and morsels of cooked chicken. The dog ate sparingly, his appetite clearly suppressed. Arthur understood the vital role of respite, of allowing the body to mend. He'd witnessed enough injuries to appreciate that. As twilight descended, casting the sky in shades of coral and lavender, Arthur noticed a strange behavior. Despite his injured state, Lucky was agitated. He kept rising, limping towards the back door, his ears pricked, his nose twitching. A soft whine would escape him, followed by a look at Arthur, his eyes brimming with earnest insistence. Arthur initially dismissed it as a simple need to relieve himself. He opened the door, and Lucky hobbled outside, but instead of heading to the usual patch of grass, he tugged toward the woods, his body oriented in that direction, a silent beckoning. "Easy now," Arthur rumbled, his voice low. "You're not ranging anywhere with that leg." He coaxed Lucky back inside, gently guiding him toward his makeshift bed. But the behavior persisted. Every few minutes, Lucky repeated the same ritual, restlessness, a hobbling toward the door, an insistent stare toward the trees. This was more than a simple bodily need, it was a petition. Arthur frowned. What allure did the woods hold? Was Lucky sensing something? Dogs had instincts, a primal link to the world that humans had largely forfeited. Or was it merely the basic yearning to shake off confinement, to revert to wildness? He weighed the options, his thoughts a jumbled mess. He couldn't risk Lucky wandering alone, not in his compromised state. But neither could he dismiss the dog's unrelenting prompting. It felt incorrect. That evening, post a light meal of scrambled eggs, Arthur retreated to his customary chair by the window, book in hand. But his gaze kept straying to Lucky, who was now resting quietly, but still stealing glances toward the back door. He tried to read, but the words swam on the page. The house's tranquility, normally a balm, now felt constricting, heavy with unasked questions. He closed the book with a sigh. "Okay, pal," he said, rising. "What's so vital out there?" Lucky's tail thumped weakly against the linoleum. He watched Arthur intently, his eyes sparkling with anticipation. Arthur grabbed his weathered coat from the hook. He didn't plan on venturing far, just a few steps to discover what was captivating Lucky's attention. He opened the door, and the cool night air swept in, laced with the scent of damp earth and pine. Lucky limped onto the porch, shivering slightly. He peered toward the woods, then back at Arthur, his eyes pleading with desperate hope. Arthur followed his gaze. The trees stood dark and hushed, silhouetted against the moonlit expanse. He could discern the rustling of leaves, the distant call of an owl. A familiar sound, one he had heard countless times. Yet, tonight, it felt different. A subtle undercurrent of something. He couldn't quite define it. He took a step off the porch, and Lucky whined softly, urging him onward. Arthur hesitated. He hadn't gone into the woods in months, not since. He banished the thought. Just a quick peek, he muttered, more for himself than for Lucky. Then we're heading back inside. He took another step, then another, until he stood at the wood's edge, the darkness enveloping him like a heavy cloak. He could feel Lucky's presence close by, a source of warmth and comfort. The dog seemed calmer now, reassured by Arthur's willingness to comply. Arthur inhaled deeply, the sharp scent of pine filling his lungs. He glanced at Lucky, his eyes full of inquiry. "Show me," he murmured. "What is it you want me to see?" Lucky took a hesitant step into the woods, then looked back, his tail giving a weak wag. The entreaty in his eyes was undeniable. And Arthur, despite his reluctance, despite the looming memories, found himself following. He couldn't articulate it, but he knew, with a conviction that defied reason, that Lucky was guiding him somewhere important. Somewhere he needed to be. Into the unknown. The small pack felt heavy on Arthur's back, a collection of necessities that felt wholly inadequate for the unknown. A flask of water, a handful of dried meat, a compass he hadn't used in decades, and a small first aid kit, mostly for Lucky, he admitted to himself. He adjusted the strap, the leather creaking a familiar, comforting sound against the unsettling silence of the cottage. Even the birds seemed to have gone elsewhere this morning. He glanced at Lucky, who sat patiently by the door, tail thumping a soft rhythm against the worn floorboards. The dog's eyes, usually bright and full of mischief, held a steady, unwavering focus on the woods beyond. There was a purpose in that gaze, a silent plea Arthur couldn't ignore. "All right, old boy," Arthur sighed, his breath misting in the cool morning air. "Let's see what you're so eager to find." He grabbed his walking stick, a sturdy piece of oak he'd carved himself years ago. It wasn't just for balance, it was a grounding force, a tangible link to the earth beneath his feet. He needed that link now, more than ever. The edge of the woods loomed, a dark, impenetrable curtain of green and shadow. The air grew cooler as he approached, carrying the scent of damp earth and decaying leaves. A shiver ran down his spine, a primal response to the untamed wildness that lay before him. He stopped at the tree lean, his hand gripping the walking stick so tightly his knuckles ached. He remembered stories his grandfather had told him, tales whispered around crackling fires about the dangers that lurked within these very woods. Stories of travelers lost, of strange creatures sighted, of a darkness that swallowed men whole. Arthur had dismissed them as folklore, old wives' tales meant to scare children. But standing here now, on the precipice of the unknown, a sliver of doubt crept into his mind. "It's just trees, Arthur," he muttered, trying to reassure himself. "Just trees and shadows." But it wasn't just trees. It was the weight of the past, the echo of his own failures that clung to the air. The woods felt like a metaphor for the tangled mess of his memories, a place where he might easily lose himself. Lucky whined softly, nudging Arthur's hand with his wet nose. He looked up at Arthur, his eyes pleading. There was no fear in them, only a quiet determination. It was as if Lucky understood Arthur's hesitation, his internal struggle, and was offering him a silent reassurance. Arthur knelt down, scratching Lucky behind the ears. "You really want to do this, don't you?" Lucky responded with an enthusiastic lick to Arthur's face, then turned and took a tentative step into the woods. He looked back, waiting. Arthur hesitated for another moment, the weight of his past heavy on his shoulders. He thought of the garden, the neat rows of vegetables, the predictable rhythm of weeding and watering. It was safe, it was comfortable, it was stagnant. He thought of Silas, too, and the man's cold, calculating eyes. Silas was a threat, a disruption to the peace Arthur had so carefully cultivated. And perhaps, just perhaps, whatever lay in these woods was connected to Silas's unwelcome arrival. He took a deep breath, the crisp air filling his lungs. He had spent too long hiding, too long dwelling on the ghosts of yesterday. He owed it to himself, to Lucky, to face whatever lay ahead. Straightening his shoulders, Arthur pushed past his fear. He trusted Lucky, he trusted his instincts, and he trusted that somewhere, deep down, he still possessed the courage he thought he had lost. "All right, boy," he said, his voice stronger now. "Let's go." He stepped into the woods, the canopy closing above him like a verdant curtain. The light dimmed, casting long, dancing shadows on the forest floor. The air grew thick with the scent of pine and damp earth. He could hear the rustling of leaves, the distant call of a bird, the gentle murmur of the wind through the trees. It was a world apart, a world that felt both ancient and alive. Lucky, his limp barely noticeable now, led the way, his nose to the ground, his tail wagging with purpose. Arthur followed, his walking stick providing a steady rhythm against the uneven terrain. The path was barely discernible, overgrown with moss and fallen leaves. Arthur had to watch his step, navigating the roots and rocks that lay hidden beneath the undergrowth. The trees grew close together, their branches intertwined, forming a natural archway that seemed to guide them deeper into the woods. As they walked, Arthur noticed small details he might have missed before. The intricate patterns on the bark of the trees, the delicate veins of a fallen leaf, the way the sunlight filtered through the canopy, creating dappled patterns on the forest floor. He felt a sense of awe, a connection to the natural world he had long forgotten. They continued their trek, the silence broken only by the crunch of leaves underfoot and the occasional snap of a twig. Arthur felt a growing sense of anticipation, a feeling that they were getting closer to something important. He could feel it in the air, a subtle shift in the energy of the woods. After what felt like an eternity, Lucky stopped, his ears perked, his body tense. He looked up at Arthur, his eyes shining with excitement. He whined softly, then nudged Arthur forward with his nose. Before them, nestled in a small clearing, stood a cabin. It was old, weathered, and partially obscured by vines, but it was undeniably there. A plume of smoke curled lazily from its chimney, a silent promise of warmth and perhaps, answers. The hidden path. The air was a muggy shroud, clinging to Arthur like a second skin. Sunlight, strained through the thick arboreal ceiling, painted the forest floor with dancing shards of illumination. He nudged aside a dripping branch, the reek of pine and mold assaulting his senses. Each step brought a throb of complaint from his knees, a persistent echo of old battles and youthful indiscretions. Lucky, however, seemed immune to the passage of time, his nose glued to the earth, navigating the labyrinthine undergrowth with effortless grace, his tail a cheerful counterpoint to the heavy silence. Arthur, in contrast, felt the sting of every pebble, the snag of every root. His lungs burned with each gasp of the saturated air, and wiping his brow only smeared grime across his forehead. "Hold up, boy," he croaked, his voice like rusted hinges. "Give a tired soul a breather." Lucky paused, tilting his head, his expression almost human in its concern. He whined softly, then butted Arthur's hand with his cool, damp nose, before resuming his quest. Arthur winced, urging himself forward. He hadn't pushed himself this hard in ages. The gentle tempo of his days, the predictable comfort of his garden, had softened him. The forest, it seemed, demanded a reckoning. The so-called path was a brutal obstacle course of fallen timber, thorny thickets, and treacherous footing. He stumbled more than once, grabbing at rough bark for purchase, his muscles screaming in protest. He halted, leaning against an ancient oak, his heart a frantic drum against his ribs. A coppery tang filled his mouth, and a jolt of pain shot through his left knee. He closed his eyes, focusing on his breath, willing his body to cooperate. "Damn it all, Arthur," he muttered, "you're not the man you once were." Sensing his faltering spirit, Lucky nudged his leg, a silent offering of companionship. The simple act was enough to reignite his resolve. He straightened, inhaled deeply, and followed Lucky deeper into the emerald depths. The vegetation grew denser, the trees taller, their branches woven into an impenetrable tapestry overhead. The light faded, plunging the forest floor into a perpetual gloaming. An unsettling feeling crawled across Arthur's skin, a primal awareness of being watched. He surveyed the surroundings, his gaze sweeping for any sign of life, any hint of menace. The woods remained still, save for the whisper of leaves and the distant cry of a raven. Yet the sensation lingered, a cold knot forming in his gut. At long last, Lucky stopped short, his ears pricked, his body coiled like a spring. He began to sniff at the ground, his tail giving a tentative wag. Arthur approached warily, peering over Lucky's head. Initially, he saw only a thick mantle of decaying leaves, a mosaic of browns and golds obscuring the soil. But then, as he looked closer, he detected a subtle anomaly in the texture. Beneath the leaves, barely perceptible, was a shallow indentation, a subtle compression of the earth. Almost invisible, easily missed, yet undeniable to Arthur's practiced eye. A path. He knelt, sweeping aside the foliage. The earth below was packed down, smoothed by years of traffic. He traced the faint outline with his fingers. The path was narrow, barely wide enough for a single person to traverse comfortably. Overgrown, choked with weeds and saplings, yet undoubtedly there, a clandestine artery leading into the heart of the woods. "Well, I'll be damned," Arthur breathed, surprise and curiosity mingling in his voice. "What have you unearthed, boy?" Lucky barked softly, then eagerly followed the trail, nose to the ground. Arthur pushed himself to his feet, his fatigue momentarily banished. The discovery of the path had sparked a renewed sense of purpose. A confirmation they were heading in the right direction. He trailed Lucky, his eyes scanning the surroundings, searching for any clue to the path's origin or destination. The trees bordering the trail were ancient, towering over their younger brethren, their trunks contorted and bearing the scars of a bygone era. Some bore the ghosts of axe marks, long healed, remnants of a time when the forest was actively cultivated. He noticed faint symbols etched into the bark of several trees, now almost wholly obscured by lichen and moss. He attempted to decipher them, but they were too eroded, too faint to distinguish any clear forms. Remnants of a forgotten narrative, a tantalizing echo from the past. The path snaked through the woods, ascending gradually, then plunging into a shallow gully. A demanding route, requiring constant vigilance and precise steps. Nevertheless, Arthur persevered, driven by a burgeoning sense of anticipation. He sensed that he was on the precipice of uncovering something profound, something concealed for years. The air grew crisper as they climbed, the scent of pine growing more intense. The trees began to thin, allowing more light to filter through the canopy. In the distance, Arthur detected the murmur of flowing water, a welcome sign that they were nearing their goal. As they crested a gentle rise, Arthur froze, his breath catching in his throat. Nestled within a small clearing, he saw it. The cabin. A wisp of smoke curled lazily from its chimney, a delicate gray plume against the backdrop of verdant foliage. It was real. Whispers of a cabin. The trees seeded ground reluctantly, the dense canopy thinning to allow the late sun to spill onto the forest floor. Patches of gold illuminated a sight that stole Arthur's breath, halting him in his tracks. A subtle darkness first, a deeper hue amidst the verdant and earthy tones. Then, definition sharpened with proximity, the unmistakable lines of a structure etching themselves into existence, like a half-forgotten dream surfacing. A cabin. Sunk into a small clearing, as if the woods were intent on swallowing it whole. Time and weather had conspired against it. The timbers were bleached gray, adorned with the slow creep of moss and lichen. The roof sagged unevenly, promising damp within. A single window was boarded shut, the wood warped and fractured. Its counterpart, visible from where Arthur stood, was filmed with grime, an opaque barrier to the interior. Arthur paused, a hand instinctively finding the small of his aching back. He felt a curious blend of trepidation and anticipation. This was the place Lucky had so urgently guided him to. But what awaited him beyond the threshold? Lucky, unburdened by such anxieties, surged forward, his tail a bright flag against the somber landscape. He circled the dwelling once, nosing the base of the walls before trotting to the front. The door, a simple arrangement of planks, hung slightly askew, its hinges emitting a mournful groan. He nudged it with his wet nose, then turned back to Arthur, his eyes shining with an unspoken invitation. "Steady, boy," Arthur managed, his voice a rough whisper. He shuffled towards the cabin, his boots crushing through the carpet of fallen leaves and brittle twigs. Each step was a small victory over the aches that gnawed at his aging frame. Closer now, the extent of the disrepair became even more apparent. The porch, a narrow platform stretching across the facade, was missing sizable pieces. The remaining planks were slick with a treacherous layer of moss. The chimney, cobbled together from rough-cut stones, leaned with a precarious tilt, its mortar flaking away. This wasn't merely an old cabin, it was a ruin. Abandoned, perhaps, decades before. He reached the porch, his hand hovering inches from the door. The silence pressed in, broken only by the soft whisper of leaves and Lucky's quiet panting at his side. The air hung thick with the perfume of damp earth, decaying wood, and an elusive undercurrent, something indefinable, yet stirringly familiar. He glanced down at Lucky, the dog practically humming with eagerness, his gaze locked on the shadowed entrance. No fear there, only fervent anticipation. Arthur drew a deep breath, the scent of the woods filling him. He considered the Thorn family, their sacrifices and their lasting legacy. He recalled the puzzling map, the hidden trail, and Lucky's unwavering purpose. He thought of the newcomer, with his veiled threats and unsettling air. Too late to retreat now. He reached out and pushed the door open further. It scraped and whined, the sound amplified in the stillness of the clearing. The interior remained veiled in shadow, the single, clouded window offering scant illumination. "Hello." Arthur called, his voice echoing faintly within the confined space. Only silence answered. He stepped inside, Lucky shadowing his every move. The air within was stale and heavy, thick with the musty breath of disuse and rot. A noticeable chill permeated the space, a welcome respite from the afternoon's lingering warmth. Arthur's vision gradually adapted to the gloom. The main room was small and Spartan. A wobbly table stood sentinel in the center, coated in a thick layer of dust. Two chairs, their backs scarred and broken, flanked it. Against one wall stood a dilapidated fireplace, its hearth buried beneath layers of ash and soot. He took a tentative step, the floorboards groaning a warning beneath his weight. He trailed a hand along the wall, registering the rough texture of the weathered wood. The cabin felt barren. Not merely devoid of furnishings, but emotionally hollow, as though life itself had been leached away long ago. Lucky began to explore, his nose twitching, his tail wagging with diminished enthusiasm. He padded over to the fireplace, sniffed at the sooty hearth, then moved towards the far corner of the room. Arthur followed, his gaze sweeping the interior. He spotted a small, narrow doorway leading to another chamber. It was almost swallowed by the shadows, barely discernible in the gloom. He approached cautiously, his heart drumming a frantic rhythm against his ribs. He could feel the weight of the unknown bearing down, anticipation coiled tight within him. What secrets lay dormant within this dwelling? What mysteries were locked behind its walls? He reached the doorway and peered inside. The adjacent room was even smaller and more dimly lit than the first. He could just make out the outline of a bed in the corner, draped with a threadbare blanket. And something else, a glint of light in the darkness. He stepped into the room, his senses on high alert. The air was even colder and damper here, clinging to his skin like a shroud. He took another step, and his foot connected with something on the floor. He glanced down. A small, wooden box. The lid was slightly ajar, revealing a tantalizing glimpse of its contents. Something that flickered and shone in the muted light filtering through the grimy window. He knelt and carefully lifted the box. It possessed a surprising heft, its weight hinting at the treasures within. He paused, his fingers trembling slightly. Then, with a deliberate breath, he opened the box. Inside, resting on a bed of faded velvet, lay a collection of medals. Military decorations. Their surfaces dimmed by time, yet their significance undeniable. Emblems of valor, emblems of service, emblems of honor. Medals that spoke volumes of courage, sacrifice, and unwavering duty. And nestled beneath the medals, a single, folded piece of paper. Arthur gingerly unfolded the brittle page, his heart pounding. The paper was yellowed and fragile, the ink faded and blurred. But he could decipher the words, etched in a shaky, handwritten script. To whoever finds this, the note began, know that you are not alone. Echoes within. Lucky, a furry whirlwind, pressed his damp nose against the cabin door, an insistent invitation Arthur couldn't refuse. The hinges shrieked, a rusty lament that sliced through the serene afternoon. A stale breath, the scent of forgotten decades, drifted from the shadowy interior. Arthur paused, the odor of aged timber mingling with a hauntingly familiar, almost corporeal presence. "Hold on, boy," he muttered, crossing the threshold. Dust motes pirouette in sunbeams that lanced through the boarded windows, spotlighting a single room suspended in time. A film of grime coated every surface, yet beneath it, Arthur glimpsed the ghost of a life lived. At the room's heart, a roughly hewn table was strewn with what resembled fossilized crumbs. An overturned chair lay beside it, as though its occupant had fled in haste. To one side, a corroded wood stove dominated the wall, its chimney pipe jutting precariously towards a ceiling void. Spectral cobwebs veiled the pipe. Lucky, whimpering with excitement, trotted towards a darkened corner. Arthur followed, his boots grinding on the debris-strewn floor. There, upon a rickety shelf, rested a collection of old photographs. Though the glass was fractured and clouded, Arthur carefully retrieved them, one by one. The first showed a young couple, their faces radiant with youthful optimism. The man, slender and handsome, sported a sharp, dark suit. The woman, linked arm in arm, beamed with delight in a simple, floral dress. They appeared utterly content, achingly so. Arthur felt a sharp twinge of something indefinable, a yearning perhaps for a serenity he'd never known. The next image displayed the same couple, now cradling a small child, a girl with bright, inquisitive eyes. The setting seemed unchanged, the hazy backdrop hinting at a sun-drenched garden. Arthur traced the child's face with his calloused thumb, a surprising tenderness welling up inside him. Other pictures followed, the girl, growing taller, playing with a dog that bore an uncanny resemblance to a disheveled Lucky, the couple, their faces subtly lined by time, but their affection still palpable in their gazes. The last photograph felt the most recent, and the most disquieting. The girl, now a young woman, possessed a look of quiet resolve instead of a smile. She was clad in military attire. Behind her stood the man, his expression etched with paternal worry. The woman's eyes glinted with steel, stirring a vague sense of recognition in Arthur. The father's concern mirrored that of countless families saying goodbye at military bases. Arthur gently replaced the photos, a creeping unease settling in his gut. Who were these people? What had compelled them to abandon this place so suddenly, leaving behind their memories? How were they connected to the cabin, to the Thorne family, and perhaps, even to himself? The medals in the box, the cryptic note, the pieces felt disparate, defying any cohesive picture. Lucky, impatient with Arthur's reverie, whined and pawed at the floorboards near the stove. Arthur knelt, his hands sweeping over the uneven planks. One yielded slightly to pressure. He slipped his fingers beneath and levered it up. The board groaned and splintered, revealing a small, concealed space. Inside, among the dust bunnies and ancient webs, lay a small, leather-bound diary. Its cover was worn and cracked, the pages tinted amber with age. He lifted it out, his pulse quickening. This felt crucial, a potential key to the mysteries within these walls. He blew away the accumulated grime, revealing a faded title embossed in golden script, Eleanor's Musings. Eleanor. The woman in uniform, presumably. He opened the diary, the fragile pages whispering like autumn leaves. The first entry was dated July 12, 1942. Papa says the world is engulfed in war, but here in Havenwood, it feels impossibly distant. Mama tries to shelter me from the grim tidings, but I can see the anxiety lurking in her eyes. I spend my days tending the garden and playing with Buster, but even he seems to sense the disquiet in the air. I pray for a swift end to this conflict, and for the safe return of Papa and all the other brave souls. Arthur flipped through the pages, his eyes darting across the entries. Eleanor chronicled her hopes and aspirations, her fears and trepidations, her affection for her family and her burgeoning sense of patriotic duty. As he read, he felt an unexpected bond with this young woman, a shared understanding of the burden of war and the longing for tranquility. Subsequent entries focused increasingly on the war effort, detailing rationing and bond drives. Still later passages chronicled her decision to enlist. They need nurses, he read, and I refuse to remain idle while others suffer. Papa vehemently opposes it, of course. He argues that it's too perilous, that I should stay here and safeguard Mama. But I cannot. I must act. I must serve. The final entry was dated May 8, 1945, VE Day. But the tone was anything but celebratory. The war has ended, yet the battles persist within. I have witnessed things, indelible things. I have lost friends, comrades, brothers and sisters in arms. I am home now, but I no longer know how to be home. The world has been irrevocably altered, and so have I. Arthur closed the diary, his hand unsteady. Eleanor's words resonated with him, echoing his own experiences, his own struggles to reintegrate into civilian life after the horrors of Vietnam. He empathized with her anguish, her disillusionment, her sense of being perpetually changed by the war. He surveyed the cabin, now perceiving it not merely as a decaying structure, but as a haven, a repository of memories, a testament to the enduring spirit of those who had served. He wondered at Eleanor's fate, and that of her family. Why had they abandoned this place? And what secret was Silas Thorne concealing? Lucky nudged his hand, his warm, brown eyes conveying concern. Arthur stroked his head, finding comfort in the dog's unwavering loyalty. He wasn't alone in this endeavor. He had Lucky, and he had a purpose, to uncover the truth concealed within these walls, to honor the memory of Eleanor Thorne, and to, at long last, find peace within himself. The air thrummed with unvoiced narratives, and Arthur knew, with a certainty that resonated deep within his soul, that his quest had only just commenced. The Thorne family mystery. Dust motes danced in the cabin's stagnant air, heavy with the mustiness of bygone years. Arthur, perched precariously on a wobbly chair, gingerly flipped through the delicate pages of Eleanor's diary. Restless Lucky emitted a low groan, his wet nose bumping against Arthur's leg, tail drumming a soft tattoo against the aged floorboards. "Quiet, boy," Arthur soothed, absently scratching behind Lucky's ears. "Almost done." This wasn't simply a record of wartime hardship, it was a portal into the soul of the Thorne family, a lineage that had seemingly evaporated. Before conflict engulfed the world, Eleanor chronicled a life brimming with modest pleasures, lakeside picnics, evenings warmed by the hearth's glow, and the unwavering presence of her father, Elias Thorne. Elias, it appeared, was the keystone holding them all together. Eleanor's words sketched a portrait of a man deeply connected to his community, a staunch believer in the power of fellowship. He ran the local mercantile, yet his true calling lay in aiding those in need. Eleanor recounted how Elias frequently extended credit to struggling neighbors, never denying assistance to anyone burdened by hardship. Then the war descended, altering the diary's tenor. Too old to enlist, Elias channeled his energies into bolstering the troops overseas. Eleanor detailed countless hours spent assembling care packages, orchestrating fundraising initiatives, and penning missives to the young men battling abroad. "Father insists we must do everything possible to ease their plight, to remind them they remain in our thoughts," one entry declared. "He believes a modicum of kindness can be a lifeline amidst the carnage." Arthur felt a surge of recognition, a familiar twinge in his heart. He, too, had known such kindness in letters from home, those small mercies offering brief respite from the brutality of battle. Did Elias Thorne ever truly know the profound impact of his endeavors, the solace he gifted those confronting unimaginable horrors? The diary entries grew more frequent as Eleanor prepared for service herself. She wrote of her profound respect for her father's indomitable spirit, her yearning to serve her nation, and her dread of leaving her kin. A tangible sense of duty permeated her words, the feeling that she was upholding her father's legacy of service and selflessness. Yet as Arthur continued, a different current began to surface, a subtle undercurrent of disquiet. Eleanor documented a burgeoning friction within the family, a series of quarrels sparked by the arrival of a distant relation, Silas Thorne. Silas, in Eleanor's estimation, was consumed by avarice, perpetually scheming and seeking avenues to augment the family's wealth. He seemed to begrudge Elias's generosity, perceiving it as a squandering of precious resources. "Silas contends we should be investing in our own prosperity, not frittering funds away on hopeless cases," Eleanor penned. "He fails to grasp that father's hopeless cases are the very bedrock of our community, the ties that bind us." The tension intensified following VE Day. Eleanor, struggling to acclimate to civilian life, found herself wedged between her father and Silas. Sleepless nights became her burden, haunted by echoes of gunfire and the weight of unspoken trauma. The family's former harmony had shattered, contaminated by Silas's cupidity and Eleanor's internal battles. Then came the entry that shot a shard of ice down Arthur's spine. The script was erratic, the ink splotched as if hastily scribbled. "Father is gone. He ventured into town this morning, and never returned. The authorities claim it was an accident, that he toppled into the river. But I refuse to believe it. Silas was the last to see him. They were embroiled in an argument near the riverbank. I witnessed it from the window. I can't decipher their words." But Elias was incensed, Silas seemingly having provoked his anger. Silas stalked away, and my father took a long walk. I distrust Silas. He conceals something. He seems pleased. Excessively so. He dwells on what father left behind, a treasure, he calls it. He says father alluded to it, something invaluable hidden somewhere on the premises. He relentlessly quizzes me, if I know anything. Father never confided in me. I suspect Silas is unhinged. He's ransacking the house, searching. I fear his intentions. He claims it is his birthright, whatever it is. Says father promised it. Arthur paused, his pulse hammering. A hidden treasure. Silas Thorne hunting for it after Elias's unexplained demise. It read like a dime novel, not the reality of a seemingly unremarkable family. He pressed on, his eyes devouring the page for further illumination. Eleanor detailed her escalating suspicion of Silas, her dread for her own well-being, and her resolution to expose the truth behind her father's passing. She resolved to seek the treasure herself, hoping it held answers. The final entry was dated mere weeks after Elias's disappearance. I believe I am close. I unearthed an antiquated map secreted in father's study. A lone X marks the spot, near the ancient oak at the property's boundary. I intend to investigate tomorrow. I know not what I will discover, but it feels momentous. Something that could reshape everything. Should anything befall me, I wish the truth about Silas to be known. He is not as he appears. He is dangerous. His only devotion is to himself and his avarice. The diary concluded there, its remaining pages empty. Arthur lowered the diary, his thoughts a whirlwind. What had Eleanor unearthed beneath that ancient oak? Had she located the treasure? And what became of her after that final entry? Had Silas found her? Silenced her? Lucky whined again, nudging Arthur's hand. Arthur gazed down at his steadfast friend, his own eyes alight with determination. He was unsure what dangers lay ahead, but he could not simply abandon this quest. He owed it to Eleanor, to Elias, to the entire Thorne lineage, to reveal the truth. He rose to his feet, his joints protesting. "Come on, Lucky," he said, his voice resolute. "Let's find that oak." Uninvited guests. The scent of petrichor still clung to the air after the brief afternoon shower, a fragrance Arthur usually found soothing. Tonight, however, it was tainted with a prickling unease. Lucky, usually snoring at Arthur's feet as he reread Eleanor's diary, was now bolt upright, a low growl rumbling in his chest. The hair on his back bristled. Arthur closed the diary, the brittle pages whispering secrets he desperately wanted to understand. He strained his ears. At first, he heard only the rustling of leaves in the ancient oak surrounding the cabin, a sound he'd grown accustomed to. But then, a distinct snapping of twigs, heavier footsteps than any forest creature would make. More than one. He rose, his old war wound twinging in protest, and moved to the window, Lucky shadowing his every step. Peeking through a gap in the moth-eaten curtains, he saw them, 3 figures, hulking shapes in the dim twilight, moving with a purpose that chilled him to the bone. One carried a rifle, glinting ominously in the fading light. "Company, Lucky," he muttered, his hand instinctively reaching for the heavy iron poker leaning against the fireplace. It wasn't much, but it was all he had. He barely had time to brace himself before the door splintered inward with a deafening crash. The 3 figures surged into the cabin, filling the small space with menace. The leader, a man with a cruel face framed by greasy black hair, brandished a pistol. Behind him stood a mountain of a man with knuckles that looked like they'd been used to break rocks, and a third, younger man, his face pale and drawn, looking like he'd rather be anywhere else. "Well, well, well," the leader sneered, his eyes raking over Arthur and the cabin. "Looks like we found ourselves a squatter." Arthur stood his ground, poker held firm. This is private property. You're trespassing. The leader laughed, a harsh, grating sound. Private property? Out here. Don't make me laugh, old man. This land belongs to whoever can take it. He gestured with the pistol. My name is Silas Blackwood. And I'm looking for something. Something that belongs to me. Lucky, sensing the threat, moved in front of Arthur, baring his teeth and growling fiercely. Silas spared him a brief, contemptuous glance. Get that mutt out of the way, Silas snapped. Unless you want him to learn a painful lesson. Arthur tightened his grip on the poker. What do you want, Blackwood? Don't play coy with me, old-timer, Silas said, stepping closer. The mountain of a man, Marcus, followed his lead, cracking his knuckles. The younger man, Jed, remained near the door, his eyes darting nervously around the cabin. We know about the Thorn family. We know about the treasure. The word hung in the air, thick with greed and desperation. Arthur felt a cold dread creep into his heart. So, it wasn't just him and Eleanor's ghost anymore. Others were drawn to this place, driven by the same avarice that had consumed Silas Thorn. Treasure. Arthur feigned ignorance. I don't know what you're talking about. Silas's face darkened. Don't lie to me. We've been following you. We saw you come here. We know you've been poking around. You think you're the only one who's heard the stories. The locals whisper about it, about Elias Thorn and his generosity. And about Silas, his greedy brother, and the treasure that disappeared with him. He stepped even closer, his breath reeking of cheap whiskey and malice. So, tell me, old man. Have you found anything? Anything of value? A chest of gold? Hidden jewels? Or maybe just some old letters and a dusty diary? He laughed again, the sound echoing in the small cabin. Arthur said nothing, his eyes fixed on Silas's. He knew any denial would be futile. They were here, they knew something, and they wouldn't leave until they got what they wanted. Or until they were convinced there was nothing to find. Marcus took a step forward, his massive frame blocking out the remaining light from the doorway. Maybe the old man needs a little persuasion, he suggested, a cruel smile spreading across his face. Jedediah shifted uncomfortably. Silas, maybe we should just look around first. Silas shot him a withering look. Shut your mouth, Jed. You're here to do what you're told. He turned back to Arthur, his eyes narrowed. I'm only going to ask you one more time. Where is it? Arthur felt a surge of anger, a cold, burning rage that he hadn't felt since the jungle. He wouldn't let these vultures desecrate Eleanor's memory, or this place that had offered him a sliver of peace. I haven't found anything, Arthur said, his voice surprisingly steady. And even if I had, I wouldn't tell you. Silas's eyes flashed with fury. He raised the pistol, aiming it directly at Arthur's chest. Lucky lunged forward, barking ferociously, but Marcus grabbed him by the scruff of the neck, hauling him back. The dog yelped in pain. All right, old man, Silas said, his voice dangerously low. You want to play it that way? Fine. We'll do this the hard way. He gestured to Marcus. Search the place. Tear it apart. Find everything. And if the old man gives you any trouble. He trailed off, letting the threat hang in the air. Marcus grinned, a predatory glint in his eyes. He released Lucky, who immediately ran back to Arthur's side, whimpering. Marcus then began ransacking the cabin, throwing books off shelves, ripping cushions, and overturning furniture. Jedediah stood by the door, his face a mask of misery, watching the destruction unfold. Arthur watched helplessly as his sanctuary was violated, his heart pounding with a mixture of fear and defiance. He knew he was outmatched, outgunned, and outmaneuvered. But he also knew he couldn't give up. He had to protect Eleanor's secrets, and somehow, find a way to survive this night. A loyal defense. The air thrummed with Lucky's rage. A throaty rumble turned into a barrage of snarls as he lunged, fangs flashing perilously close to Marcus's forearm. The man recoiled, swearing under his breath. "Get this mangy cur off me!" He lashed out, connecting with Lucky's flank. A sharp yelp, like a shard of glass in Arthur's soul, didn't deter the dog. Instead, he weaved back, a protective growl vibrating in his chest, a canine bulwark. Arthur, jolted by a surge of adrenaline, struggled upright. The diary lay abandoned, its pages whispering in the sudden gust. His gaze took in the scene, the chaos of overturned furniture, Silas's rapacious gleam, and Jed's palpable dread. The truth slammed into him. This was no squabble over land or ancient feuds, it was pure, unadulterated avarice. Hunting for something, Blackwood. Arthur's voice, though weary, possessed a core of steel. He grasped the fireplace poker, its cool weight a familiar solace. Silas chuckled, a dry, grating sound. "Let's dispense with the pretense, Penhaligon. We both know this dilapidated shack holds more than just dust bunnies." He dismissed the room with a flippant gesture. The Thorn lineage had a knack for secrets, wouldn't you agree? And a talent for deep entombment. The Thorn family served with distinction, Arthur countered, his grip firm on the iron. They provided solace to the wounded when others turned a blind eye. They earned their respite. Marcus, recovering his composure, cracked his knuckles menacingly. "Respite doesn't fill the coffers, old man. Gold does. And we hear whispers of the Thorns amassing a considerable pile." He spat, the spittle narrowly missing Lucky. Jed, by the doorway, fidgeted, averting his gaze, a sheen of perspiration slicking his brow. Silas disregarded the byplay, his focus laser-locked on Arthur. Eleanor Thorne, to be precise. A celebrated veteran herself. But even heroes require safeguards. A little rainy day fund, shall we say, for the boys returning scarred and broken. He paused, letting the words sink in. Rumor has it she secreted away a king's ransom somewhere within these very confines. A fortune intended to aid veterans. But time erodes all things, doesn't it? The veterans have passed, the thorns are gone, and the gold remains, ripe for the picking. A glacial dread seized Arthur. He had discounted the local lore, the hushed accounts of a hidden thorn treasure, as mere fancy. But now, gazing into Silas Blackwood's covetous eyes, he understood the truth. This was far from a fairy tale. "You're wasting your time," Arthur asserted, striving for a conviction he couldn't muster. "There's nothing to find." Silas's smile widened, a flash of yellowed teeth. "Oh, I beg to differ." Eleanor was too astute to maintain a ledger. She employed codes, enigmas, something only a fellow soldier could decipher. "And my intuition suggests that you, Penhaligon, are the very man to unravel them." He advanced, his voice a sibilant threat. "Now, tell me its location. Save us all a great deal of unpleasantness." Sensing the tension radiating from Arthur, Lucky placed himself squarely between the old man and Silas, a low rumble a constant warning. He favored his injured side, but his gaze remained fixed on the intruders, unwavering in its vigilance. Arthur met Silas's stare, unflinching. "You imagine I would abet you in defiling the memory of the thorns? That I would betray their sacrifice for your own venal desires?" He spat on the floor, echoing Marcus's earlier disrespect. "You severely underestimate me, Blackwood." Silas's gaze hardened. "So be it. We'll unearth it ourselves." He jerked his head towards Marcus. Gut this place. Every plank, every stone. Leave not a single cranny untouched. Marcus grinned, a vicious, predatory expression transforming his face. He seized a bookshelf and, with a grunt of exertion, hurled it against the wall. Books cascaded across the floor like autumn leaves scattered by the wind. Jed winced, his features twisted in discomfort. Arthur knew he was powerless to stop them. He was a solitary figure, aged and frail, pitted against three. But he could impede them. He could extract a price for every inch they gained. He raised the iron poker, his knuckles bone white. You crave this treasure, Blackwood? Then you'll have to bleed for it. The cabin dissolved into a vortex of destruction. Marcus, driven by Silas's commands and his own sadistic inclinations, began to systematically dismantle the furnishings, rending cushions, shattering lamps, and ripping down draperies. A choking haze of dust filled the air. Jed remained by the door, seemingly paralyzed by terror and regret, his eyes darting furtively toward Arthur. Silas, in the meantime, initiated a more deliberate search, his fingers tracing the walls, testing for concealed panels, scrutinizing the floorboards with an experienced eye. He was like a rat, tracking a scent, driven by an insatiable hunger. Lucky, despite his injury, continued to harass Marcus, snapping at his heels and barking ceaselessly. He was a persistent irritant, hindering the man's destructive spree. Marcus cursed and lashed out, but Lucky was too nimble, evading most of the blows. Arthur navigated the pandemonium, a grim resolve etched on his face. He wielded the poker to ward off Marcus, striking with surprising agility and force. He managed to connect with Marcus's arm, drawing a howl of pain and a torrent of expletives. You'll pay for that, you doddering fool. Marcus snarled, lunging. Arthur sidestepped, narrowly avoiding a blow to the head. A throbbing ache bloomed in his side, a stark reminder of his age and limitations. He was fading fast, his breath coming in ragged gasps. Abruptly, Silas bellowed, "I've found something." Everything stilled. Marcus ceased his assault on Arthur, and Jed snapped to attention, his pupils widening with anticipation. Silas stood by the fireplace, his face crimson with elation. He brandished a small, wooden box, intricately carved with depictions of soldiers in combat. "This is it," he gasped, his voice thick with triumph. "This is where she concealed it." Arthur's heart plummeted. He had clung to the hope, however faint, that the story was just that, a fabrication. But now, beholding the box in Silas Blackwood's grasp, he knew the ordeal was only beginning. Veteran's instinct. The sight of Silas clutching the wooden box, his gaze gleaming with avarice, sent a shard of ice through Arthur's veins. He recognized that container, Eleanor's trust, her legacy, resided within its wooden shell. Blackwood wouldn't defile it. "Put it down," Arthur rumbled, his voice a subdued warning that masked the coiled violence about to be unleashed. Silas cackled, a sound like rusted hinges protesting. Threats from a doddering gardener. Hardly a match for. He waved a dismissive hand toward Marcus, still battling Lucky, the terrier's incessant yaps sawing at the air. Arthur acted without pause. He'd long learned that hesitation was a fatal flaw. Scooping a generous handful of loam from the shattered pot, he hurled it, a brown cloud, into Marcus' face. The unexpected attack sent the brute reeling. He roared, a guttural sound of pain and disorientation, blindly swatting the air. Lucky, seizing the opportunity, renewed his assault, clamping his jaws onto Marcus's pant leg with ferocious intensity. "Jed! Get that cur off him!" Silas snapped, his veneer of control cracking under pressure. Jedediah Stone, lingering nervously near the doorway, flinched at the command. He shuffled forward, a picture of unease, extending a tentative hand toward the terrier. Lucky responded with a menacing snarl and a snap of his jaws, sending Jed scurrying back, white-faced. Arthur capitalized on the chaos. His movements belied his age, ingrained reflexes honed from years of conflict taking over. He knew brute force was not an option against Marcus, but cunning was. Deftly evading the flailing giant, he slammed his shoulder into Marcus's gut, unbalancing him. Still sightless and reeling, Marcus crashed backward into the coffee table, sending it tumbling. He landed with a thud that shook the room, a groan escaping his lips. Lucky, released from his duty, trotted back to Arthur's side, tail wagging tentatively, ever vigilant. "You son of a..." Silas started, but Arthur cut him off with a steely glare. "You think you're the first to underestimate me?" Arthur's voice was dangerously level. "You see an old man, I see a lifetime of weathering storms. Surviving when men like you wished me dead." Silas's eyes narrowed, a predatory glint replacing amusement. His grip tightened on the box. "What are you babbling about, codger?" "Key San, Hugh, Hamburger Hill resonate within me," Arthur replied, each word a nail hammered into a coffin. "I've tasted hell and survived. I know the dance of desperation, the art of using every advantage. And right now, Silas, the odds are not in your favor." He gestured to the disarray of the room, the overturned furniture, the dirt streaking Marcus's face, Jed's trembling frame. Arthur advanced on Silas, his gaze relentless. For the first time, Silas seemed to falter. He flicked his eyes to Marcus, still struggling to rise, then toward Jed, whose eyes darted nervously. "Jed, get him!" Silas barked, his voice laced with desperation. Jedediah hesitated. He glanced at Arthur, then back at Silas, his face a canvas of doubt. He opened his mouth, but no sound emerged. Arthur detected a glimmer of uncertainty in Jed's gaze, a silent plea for a way out. He decided to exploit that vulnerability. "He's using you, Jed," Arthur said, his tone low and compelling. "He doesn't care about you, you're just a pawn." Jedediah's eyes widened, a question forming in their depths as he looked at Silas. Silas's face hardened into a mask of fury. "Don't listen to his lies, Jed. He's trying to deceive you." Arthur ignored Silas, maintaining his focus on Jed. "This isn't about monetary gain, Jed. This is about honoring the past, paying tribute to those who sacrificed. Do you wish to be part of that defilement?" The words hung in the air, imbued with unspoken significance. Jedediah looked between Arthur and Silas, his inner turmoil etched in every line of his face. He closed his eyes briefly, then inhaled deeply. I can't," he stammered, his voice barely audible. "I just can't do this." Silas's face twisted in incandescent rage. "You lily-livered cur," he roared. He whirled toward Arthur, his eyes blazing with unadulterated fury. "Fine. I'll finish you myself." He lunged, the wooden box clutched like a crude weapon. Anticipating the move, Arthur dropped to the floor, narrowly avoiding the descending box, and swept Silas's feet from under him. Silas crashed to the floor, the box wrenched from his grasp. It skittered across the floor, finally stopping near the hearth. Arthur was upon him in a heartbeat, pinning him down. "This isn't about wealth, Silas," Arthur growled, his face inches from Silas's. "This is about reverence. Revering those who came before, those who gave everything. And you, Silas, have shown utter contempt." He tightened his hold, feeling Silas thrash weakly beneath him. He saw the primal fear blossoming in Silas's eyes, the dawning realization that he had profoundly misjudged his adversary. "You don't understand," Silas gasped, his voice choked with desperation. "The thorns, they were fools. They squandered their fortune on mercenaries. Arthur's grip intensified. They understood something you never will, he said, his voice devoid of pity. They understood the significance of service. The vital need to support their people. He held Silas's gaze, allowing the enormity of his words to penetrate. He saw the seething rage, the crippling frustration, the unadulterated avarice that defined Silas Blackwood. And with a profound certainty that resonated to the core of his being, he knew he couldn't allow Silas to destroy the Thorn legacy. The map and the message. Arthur gingerly unfurled the delicate pages of Eleanor's diary, the musty fragrance of aging paper and desiccated blossoms saturating the cramped space. An oppressive stillness lingered, thick with the bitter tang of recent fear, mingling with the loam-rich scent emanating from his toppled gardening implements. He gave a curt glance to Silas, Marcus, and Jed, a trussed trio huddled in the corner. Their eyes, pools of mingled fury and trepidation, tracked his every move. Beside them, Lucky, ever the sentinel, sat motionless, a low grumble vibrating within his chest, gaze unwavering. He'd suspected the diary held more than the chronicles of Eleanor's wartime nursing and reflective musings. Those entries, though touching, struck a false note, a carefully crafted smokescreen obscuring something far more substantial. Now, nearing the journal's conclusion, his hunch solidified. Tucked between the final passage and the rear cover, bound by a time-faded ribbon of silk, lay a folded scrap of parchment. A tremor danced through Arthur's aged hands as he untied the knot, his pulse quickening with anticipation. He carefully spread open the parchment, revealing a roughly sketched map. It depicted the woods surrounding the cabin, familiar features, the babbling brook, the gnarled oak bearing a lightning's brand, the jagged bluff, rendered with meticulous precision. A bold X pinpointed a location a significant distance away, buried deep within the forest's shadowed heart. A wave of fatigue washed over Arthur, a stark reminder of his advancing years and body etched with the memories of past conflicts. A trek through the dense thicket was far from appealing, yet the map spoke plainly. This was it. The location of whatever Eleanor Thorne had deemed worthy of safeguarding, worthy of entrusting to him. He chanced a glance at Silas, whose gaze sharpened as he observed Arthur scrutinizing the map. Marcus, ever dim-witted, simply looked perplexed. Jed, however, met Arthur's eyes with a spark of nascent hope. Perhaps the boy was finally grasping the consequences of his actions. So, knitting circles weren't exactly her thing, huh? Silas grumbled through the gag. Arthur paid him no mind, his attention laser-focused on the map. He needed to plot his course, evaluate the terrain. He wouldn't underestimate whatever Eleanor had concealed. Lucky, stay, Arthur instructed, his tone resolute. The dog emitted a soft whine but obeyed, settling back down beside the bound men. Arthur procured some cord from the shed. He reinforced the knots binding Silas and his partners, ensuring their immobility. No chances would be taken. "Wouldn't want you boys getting bored while I'm gone," he commented, his voice devoid of warmth. "Sheriff should be along shortly." He could only hope. He'd made the call, but Brody was notoriously unreliable. Silas strained against his bonds, his face twisting with fury. "You haven't won, old man. This isn't over." Arthur offered a dry, mirthless chuckle. "Perhaps not, Silas. But for the moment, you're stuck right here." He rummaged through Eleanor's pantry, unearthing a worn satchel. He loaded it with essentials, a canteen of water, a couple of stale biscuits, a compact first aid kit, and his dependable army knife. He also retrieved Eleanor's well-worn cane, its wood polished smooth with age and handling. It felt like a lifeline to her, a tangible link to the past. Just before departing, Jed locked eyes with him again. This time, the glimmer of hope morphed into a silent plea. Arthur couldn't decipher the unspoken words, but he sensed the boy's remorse, his yearning for a second chance. "You reaped what you sowed, son," Arthur stated, his voice gentle but firm. "Now you must answer for it." He couldn't grant Jed forgiveness. That was a burden the boy had to shoulder himself. He stepped from the cabin, the cool evening air a refreshing contrast to the stuffy interior. The sun began its descent below the horizon, painting long shadows across the forest floor. He inhaled deeply, the fragrance of pine needles and damp earth filling his lungs. It was an indelible scent, one that summoned images of jungles and rice paddies, of fellowship and bereavement. He consulted the map one final time, orienting himself to the surrounding landscape. The X marked a spot roughly 2 miles into the woods, near a location Eleanor had scrawled on the map as Whispering Falls. He hadn't discovered such a place during his expeditions, yet the map was unambiguous. With a final backward glance at the cabin, Arthur ventured into the woods, the walking stick tapping softly against the earth. Lucky whined once more, then quieted, resuming his vigil. The woods were hushed, save for the rustling of foliage and the occasional hoot from a distant owl. Arthur progressed slowly but steadily, his senses heightened. He was an old man, but far from defenseless. The years had weathered him, but also honed his instincts, sharpened his perception. As he ambled, he pondered Eleanor Thorne, her lifetime of service and selflessness, the legacy she had charged him with protecting. He knew not what awaited him at Whispering Falls, but he knew he couldn't let her down. He owed it to her, to all the veterans who had given their all, to safeguard that which she considered essential. The woods deepened, the shadows growing more pronounced. The air grew noticeably colder, a chill that penetrated his very core. Yet Arthur continued onward, propelled by a sense of purpose, a sense of commitment. He was no longer merely a gardener seeking peace among the flora. He was a protector, a guardian of a heritage. He was Arthur Penhaligon, and he had a duty to fulfill. He reached Whispering Falls, a secluded cascade of water trickling over verdant, moss-draped rocks into a pool of shallow depth. The sound was subtle, almost lost in the symphony of the leaves, yet it resonated, a hushed murmur that seemed to echo through the trees. He surveyed the location, cross-referencing it with the map. The X marked an area behind the falls, near a large, flat boulder. Arthur approached the rock warily, his hand instinctively gravitating toward his army knife. He reached behind the rock, his fingers brushing against something cool and metallic. He drew it out, revealing a small, tarnished silver box. It was secured with a lock. He glanced around, searching for any hint of danger. The woods were silent, still holding their secrets. He knelt down, giving the box a careful inspection. It was an antique, yet solidly built. He knew he could pry it open with his knife, but hesitated. Eleanor had clearly gone to great lengths to safeguard its contents. He owed it to her to proceed with respect, with caution. He felt around the base of the rock, his fingers probing the moss and loose soil. Then, his fingers closed around it, a small, intricately carved wooden key, tucked beneath a displaced stone. His heart skipped a beat. He slotted the key into the lock and turned. With a delicate click, the box sprang open. Inside, resting on a bed of faded velvet, was a single, folded letter. A treasure of letters. The chilled silver box, a metallic iceberg in Arthur's sweating grip, felt alien against the muggy embrace of the woods. He fought the urge to wrench it open, the suspense coiling tight, a constricting serpent in his gut. A glance over his shoulder revealed the cabin, a jagged tear in the twilight. Lucky, ever vigilant, stood guard. No worries there. Arthur pressed onward, guided by the map's final cryptic instruction, where ancient roots embrace untold tales, beneath the oak's unwavering gaze. The path veered deeper, abandoning the murmur of the falls for the looming silhouette of an ancient oak. Its boughs, each as thick as a strong man's biceps, stretched skyward in a silent supplication. The earth at its base was a mosaic of decaying leaves, yielding soil, and the exposed sinews of its root system. He circled the Titan, his gaze charting the labyrinthine network below. Kneeling, his legs sinking into the loamy earth, he ran a questing hand over the thickest roots, searching for any telltale irregularity, any hint of a concealed cache. It was Lucky who alerted him, a soft whine preceding a nudge against a patch where the earth looked subtly disturbed. Arthur investigated, his fingers tracing the outline of an expertly hidden panel. A gentle pressure, and with a quiet click, a section pivoted inward, revealing a shadowed recess. His flashlight beam lanced through the gloom, illuminating a wooden box, smaller than its silver counterpart, hewn from somber, unvarnished timber. Time-worn yet remarkably preserved. He retrieved it carefully, the cool, smooth grain a balm against his skin. Back in a small clearing, bathed in the last embers of sunset, he settled onto a moss-covered log. The forest hummed with the advent of night, the trill of crickets, the whisper of leaves, the lonely cadence of an owl's call. The wooden box rested on his lap, his pulse a frantic drumbeat. This wasn't about glittering riches, this was about lineage, about the very fabric of the Thorn family story. He hesitated, then gingerly lifted the lid. No lock, but the box overflowed. Not with gems or ingots, but with letters. Hundreds, bound with faded ribbons and time-worn twine. A wave of antique fragrance rose to meet him, aged paper, dried ink, a poignant aroma that spoke of generations past. He lifted a bundle, his fingers trembling almost imperceptibly. The envelopes, addressed to Elias Thorn, Eleanor's father, bore a kaleidoscope of handwriting, some flourishes elegant and refined, others spidery and hesitant. Postmarks from across the globe, Europe, Asia, the far reaches of the Pacific. Untying the ribbon, he carefully unfolded the first letter. The paper, frail as a butterfly's wing, bore faded but legible script. Dear Mr. Thorn, it began, writing from a field hospital in France. My wounds are healing, and your care package couldn't have arrived at a better time. The chocolates and socks were lifesavers, but more than that, your words of encouragement gave me the will to persevere. Knowing someone back home cares makes all the difference. My deepest gratitude. It was signed simply, a grateful soldier. A lump formed in Arthur's throat. He unfolded another, then another. Each echoed the same sentiment, tales of adversity, resilience, and profound appreciation. Soldiers writing from the front lines, from recovery wards, from the chilling confines of POW camps. They recounted the brutality of war, but also the small mercies, the glimmers of humanity that sustained them. They wrote of Elias Thorn's open-handedness, his unwavering support for the troops, his singular ability to offer a beacon of hope in the profound darkness. One, scrawled in haste, depicted a dire situation in the trenches. Supplies are critically low, and morale is plummeting. Your donation of blankets and medical provisions was nothing short of life-saving. Words cannot express my appreciation for your selflessness. Another, stained with what could only be tears, spoke of devastating loss. Learning of my brother's death has been excruciating. Your letter of condolence offered a solace I desperately needed. Thank you for remembering him, for acknowledging his sacrifice. Arthur devoted the next hour to the letters, his heart brimming with emotion. He learned of Elias Thorn's tireless efforts in support of the troops, orchestrating fundraisers, gathering donations, writing uplifting letters, and sending care packages brimming with necessities and small comforts. He was a pillar of strength, a guiding light for those serving abroad. These weren't mere letters, they were slices of history, testaments to the enduring force of human empathy. They unveiled a portrait of a man who had dedicated himself to the service of others, a man whose legacy transcended mere inheritance. They revealed the Thorn family's true inheritance, not precious metals, but kindness, philanthropy, and unwavering devotion to those who risked everything for their nation. A wave of shame washed over Arthur. He had been so consumed by the lure of riches, by the prospect of some tangible payoff, that he had failed to grasp the true significance. The real treasure wasn't locked away in a vault, but etched in the hearts of those whom the Thorne family had touched. He pictured Eleanor, with her quiet fortitude and unshakable commitment to upholding her family's heritage. He now understood why she had entrusted him with this task. It wasn't about acquiring wealth, it was about honoring her father's memory and perpetuating his legacy of service and compassion. He carefully gathered the letters, readying the ribbons and placing them back within the wooden box. He closed the lid, a sense of serenity washing over him. He knew his path. He had to discover a way to extend the Thorne family's legacy, to honor their promise to those who served. The forest had deepened into night, illuminated only by a sliver of moon filtering through the canopy. He rose, the wooden box feeling substantial in his grip. He turned back towards the cabin, his resolve strengthened. He still had to confront Silas Blackwood, but his conviction had been forged in the crucible of understanding. This wasn't a quest for fortune or authority, it was a fight to preserve a legacy of devotion and sacrifice. It was about paying tribute to Elias Thorne and carrying forth his mission. He started back, Lucky trotting faithfully at his heel. As he walked, he made a vow. He would commit his resources to supporting veterans in need. He would find a way to make a meaningful difference, to honor the Thorne family and to atone for his own troubled past. The road ahead remained treacherous, but for the first time in years, Arthur sensed a flicker of optimism. He was no longer just a haunted veteran seeking solace, he was a guardian of a legacy, a torchbearer of a noble cause. And he would safeguard that flame. Honoring the legacy. The westering sun draped Arthur's garden in long shadows, gilding the vegetable rows with amber and jade. Down on his haunches, he meticulously cleared weeds from a tomato plant, his gnarled hand surprisingly tender. Nearby, Lucky, his canine confidant, panted softly, an ear flicking at a distant engine's drone. Elias Thorne's letters lingered in his thoughts, their empathetic words stirring feelings Arthur had long suppressed. He recalled the faces of soldiers Elias had aided, mirroring the haunted, weary countenances he'd witnessed among his own troops in Vietnam. The sheer contrast, Elias's quiet benevolence against war's savage backdrop, was striking. He'd borne the weight of those battles, the echoes of gunfire and the faces of the fallen, for an eternity, it seemed. Straightening, Arthur felt his back twinge in familiar protest. He swiped at his brow, leaving a smudge of earth on his forehead. What to do with these letters? Rebury them? Let them molder, another relic of a life only now coming into focus? No. Elias hadn't intended silence. He'd written to offer balm, to ignite hope when shadows fell deepest. He ambled toward the house, Lucky pacing beside him like a furry echo. Inside, the air hung still and cool. He reached for the phone, a slight tremor in his fingers as he punched in numbers. The Veterans Organization's listing, scribbled in a notepad near the telephone, was located. Sarah Jenkins. He remembered her voice, warm, genuine, from their brief contact weeks prior. The phone buzzed twice before she answered. Veteran Support, Sarah speaking. Sarah, Arthur Penhaligon here, he said, his voice a gravelly whisper. We spoke some time ago, about garden assistance. Mr. Penhaligon. Of course, I recall. How fares the garden? The garden thrives, he replied, a ghost of a smile gracing his lips. But I've unearthed something. Something of greater import, I believe. Oh. Curiosity tinged Sarah's tone. Difficult to convey over the line, Arthur admitted. Might I impose with a visit? Perhaps tomorrow. Absolutely, Sarah responded, her enthusiasm bubbled. We're always available. What hour suits you best? They set a time for the following morn. Arthur cradled the receiver, a sense of purpose unfurling within him. A spark of hope flickered, a sensation absent for years. That night, slumber proved elusive. He tossed and turned, Vietnam specters dancing in his mind. The jungle's claustrophobia, the oppressive heat, the ever-present dread, yet now, entwined with these phantoms, were Elias Thorne's words, a harmonious blend of compassion and humanity. He envisioned Elias tending to wounded men, composing letters for them, offering a reassuring presence and a kind word. Come morning, Arthur gingerly placed the letters within a sturdy leather satchel. He donned his finest, a crisp button-down and his threadbare corduroys, usually reserved for rare, significant occasions. Lucky, sensing the day's gravity, wagged his tail with unusual gusto. The Veterans Organization occupied a humble building on the town's periphery. As Arthur steered into the lot, he noticed a group of veterans assembled outside, conversing and laughing. The sound was a balm to his solitary existence. Sarah Jenkins greeted him at the entrance, radiating warmth and welcome. She was a young woman, her eyes filled with gentle resolve. Mr. Penhaligon, delighted to see you again. Please, come in. She guided him to her office, a compact, busy space crammed with files and photographs. A poster proclaimed, "We remember, we honor, we serve." So, what treasure have you brought to share? Sarah inquired, settling into her seat. Arthur hesitated, his gaze drawn to the poster. I discovered some old letters, he began, his voice hushed. Penned by my ancestor, Elias Thorne, during the Great War. He carefully opened the satchel, presenting the letters to Sarah. She accepted them reverently, her fingers tracing the faded script. Elias Thorne, she murmured, reading the signature on the first page. I've heard tell of the Thorne family. Quite prominent in these parts, weren't they? Indeed, Arthur confirmed. But their station held little importance. It was their actions that defined them. Elias channeled his resources into aiding soldiers, offering succor and care. He composed letters, sent packages, even visited them in hospitals. Sarah absorbed several letters, her expression growing increasingly contemplative. She met Arthur's gaze, her eyes glistening. These are extraordinary, she said softly. The empathy, the profound kindness, truly inspiring. Arthur leaned forward, his hands clasped tightly. I pondered, perhaps these letters might resonate with others. Maybe they could extend some relief to struggling veterans grappling with their inner turmoil. Sarah nodded, her voice thick. You speak truth. These letters possess significant power. We could feature them in our groups, read them aloud, and let them illuminate paths to hope, even in the darkest recesses. She paused, her gaze locking with Arthur's. This is a truly remarkable gesture, Mr. Penhaligon. You honor your ancestors' legacy in a way I suspect Elias himself would applaud. A surge of emotion coursed through Arthur, a confluence of sorrow and release. He'd spent years evading his past, attempting to drown the pain and remorse. Now, he faced it squarely, not by fixating on the horrors witnessed, but by embracing the compassion inherited from generations past. I just wish to assist, he whispered. To effect change. Sarah smiled, understanding shining in her eyes. You already are, Mr. Penhaligon. You already are. Later that afternoon, Arthur reclined in his garden, observing the sun's descent. Lucky rested at his feet, his head nestled on Arthur's shoe. The garden glowed with a warm, honeyed light, the air fragrant with blossoms and herbs. His mind wandered to the veterans at the organization, poring over the letters, finding solace in Elias Thorne's words. He thought of his own lost comrades, those he'd strived to save. And he realized, with unwavering certainty, that he walked a true path. He honored the legacy, not only of the Thorn lineage, but of all who had served, sacrificed, and given their all for something grander. The garden, his sanctuary, now provided healing for others, too. A new mission. The cabin stood hushed as dawn painted the sky, a wisp of smoke spiraling from its chimney. Arthur halted at the porch's edge, Lucky a steadfast shadow by his side. His fingers traced the well-worn railing, a silent homage to Eleanor, to Elias, to the generations of Thorns who had sought sanctuary and offered comfort within those time-worn walls. A repository of echoes, yes, but also a crucible of healing. He'd arrived seeking clarity, yet unearthed something far more precious, a renewed zest for life. "Shall we, old friend?" he murmured, ruffling the fur behind Lucky's ears. A responsive thump of tail against the planking was his answer, bright eyes unwavering on Arthur's face. Casting one last glance at the structure, Arthur descended the steps, Lucky padding along beside him. Each footfall felt lighter, the burden of yesterday, though lingering, no longer a crushing weight. The drive to the Veterans Center held a novel quality. The familiar twinge in his joints remained, yet it was eclipsed by a burgeoning sense of anticipation. No mere repetition of rote actions this time, he possessed a calling, a task. Elias Thorne's letters, brimming with empathy and insight, rested securely in his bag, ready to be disseminated. He hoped their impact would resonate as profoundly with others as it had with him. Sarah Jenkins greeted him with her characteristic sunny disposition. "Arthur. Wonderful to have you back. How did your trip go?" "Transformative, Sarah," he replied, mirroring her smile. "I have something I'm eager to share with the group, if you're amenable." Sarah's brows arched inquisitively. "Absolutely. Anything beneficial to our veterans is most welcome." For the subsequent hour, he recited excerpts from Elias's correspondence, his voice gaining resonance with each passage. He illuminated Elias's comprehension of the invisible wounds, the battles waged long after the cessation of gunfire. He observed the faces in the room, discerning nods of acknowledgement, nascent sparks of hope in weary countenances. Upon concluding, a profound silence descended, heavy with emotion. Then, a hand tentatively rose. It belonged to a young woman, scarcely older than the soldiers he recalled deploying to Vietnam. "Thank you, Arthur," she expressed, her voice thick with emotion. That resonated deeply. It's comforting to know someone understood, even then. Others echoed her sentiments, recounting their own sagas, their personal ordeals. Arthur listened intently, dispensing words of encouragement, drawing strength from Elias's wisdom and his own lived experiences. He felt a kinship with these men and women, a shared understanding forged in the crucible of conflict. Lucky, attuned to the shifting atmosphere, circulated among the group, offering a consoling nudge here, a gentle lick there. A furry, four-legged confidant, dispensing silent support. As the gathering neared its close, Sarah approached him, her eyes alight. "Arthur, that was remarkable." The veterans connected with Elias's words on a visceral level. "We've been grappling with ways to address the enduring psychological scars of war, and I believe you've provided us with a potent instrument." "It wasn't my doing, Sarah," Arthur demurred, shaking his head. "It was Elias. I merely conveyed his message." "Well, you did so admirably," she insisted. "Would you be amenable to repeating this? Perhaps on a recurring basis?" Arthur glanced down at Lucky, who nudged his palm. He returned Sarah's gaze, taking in the faces of the veterans, etched with suffering yet also bearing a nascent glimmer of optimism. A renewed sense of purpose blossomed within him. "Yes, Sarah," he affirmed, his voice resolute. "I would." News of Silas Blackwood's apprehension reached Arthur the following day. Sheriff Brody paid him a visit, his expression grave. "We secured what we needed, Arthur," Brody announced, leaning against the porch railing. "The documentation you furnished, coupled with evidence unearthed at Blackwood's office, sufficed to obtain a warrant. He's been indicted on charges of fraud, forgery, and a litany of other offenses." A wave of relief washed over Arthur, a burden lifted from his shoulders. "He can't inflict harm on anyone else," he murmured, almost to himself. "No, he cannot," Brody affirmed. "He attempted to bury the truth, but you unearthed it. You performed a commendable service, Arthur." Brody continued, "I also wish to express my gratitude for your cooperation. This case was a convoluted tangle, but you assisted us in unraveling it. The Thorne family's legacy is secure now." He paused, then added, "It's citizens such as yourself that maintain the integrity of this town." Arthur simply nodded, gratitude welling within him. "Just pleased I could assist, Sheriff." The ensuing days settled into a comfortable cadence. Arthur devoted his mornings to maintaining the cabin, splitting wood, and indulging in lengthy woodland strolls with Lucky. In the afternoons, he volunteered at the veteran support group, sharing Elias's letters, hearing their narratives, offering encouragement. He possessed no formal qualifications as a therapist or counselor, yet he was a fellow soldier, a survivor, and that often proved sufficient. One afternoon, as he was departing the facility, a young veteran approached him. His name was David, and Arthur had noticed him at several prior meetings. He was reserved, withdrawn, his eyes haunted by the specters he had witnessed. "Arthur," David stammered hesitantly, I wanted to express my gratitude for sharing those letters. They helped me feel a little less isolated." Arthur smiled, a heartfelt smile that illuminated his eyes. "You're not isolated, David," he reassured, placing a hand on the young man's shoulder. "We're all navigating this path together." He recounted his own ordeals to David, his personal demons. He spoke candidly of the guilt, the fear, the memories that plagued his slumber. He offered no sugar-coated illusions, yet he extended hope. He conveyed to David that healing was attainable, that peace could be found, that renewed life was possible. David listened intently, his gaze riveted on Arthur's face. Upon Arthur's conclusion, David nodded slowly. "Thank you," he repeated, his voice imbued with newfound strength. I believe I needed to hear that." As Arthur steered his way back to the cabin, Lucky riding shotgun, he experienced a profound sense of serenity. He had discovered his calling, his purpose. He was no longer fleeing his past, rather, he was embracing it, leveraging it to aid others. He was honoring the Thorne family's legacy, not through the pursuit of wealth or influence, but through the dissemination of compassion and support to those who had served their nation. The sun commenced its descent, painting elongated shadows across the lane. Arthur glanced at Lucky, who rested his head on Arthur's leg, and smiled. The dog's unwavering presence offered constant solace, a reminder of his non-isolation. Back at the cabin, Arthur settled onto the porch, observing the burgeoning stars in the indigo sky. He reminisced about Elias, about Eleanor, about the generations of Thorns who had preceded him. He felt a profound connection to them, a sense of belonging he had never previously known. He surveyed the forest, at the trees swaying gently in the nocturnal breeze. He absorbed the symphony of the night, the chirping of crickets, the hooting of an owl. He felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude for all he possessed, for the cabin, for Lucky, for his newfound raison d'etre. He recognized that the path ahead would not be devoid of obstacles. Challenges would arise, setbacks would occur, moments of self-doubt would inevitably surface. Yet he also possessed the certainty that he was not alone. He had Lucky by his side, and he carried the memory of Elias Thorne, a beacon of hope amidst a world often shrouded in darkness. He rose, stretched, and inhaled deeply of the cool, nocturnal air. Come on, boy, he addressed Lucky. Let's seek some rest. We have obligations to fulfill tomorrow. As they retreated indoors, Arthur knew irrevocably that his existence had been transformed. He was no longer merely a haunted veteran, adrift in the shadows of his past. He was a man imbued with a mission, a man driven by purpose, a man who was, at long last, prepared to embrace life anew.